Have you decided that the DM's time in the sun has come to an end, and now is the moment for you and your party to rise under the cover of Twilight? Well, there just so happens to be a subclass for that, and it might just be a little too good. Let's have a chat about the Twilight Domain Cleric then, shall we? Hi there, I'm just a second level fighter who likes talking about Dungeons and Dragons, and if you think Renesmee is a really awful name for a horrifying CGI-faced vampire-human hybrid baby thing, then consider hitting the subscribe button or leaving a like or comment on the video. If you know, and you have my deepest condolences. But enough about that, because today we're covering another highly contentious subclass in D&D. The Twilight Cleric was originally published in Tash's Cauldron of Everything and has been the topic of many arguments since. It is a very clearly support-focused type of cleric that draws on the themes of rest, recuperation, and preparation for the dangers that come with nightfall. Twilight is one of the most peaceful and serene times of the day, and deities that have this area of esoteric and arbitrary fixation fall within their domain are generally good and kind in nature. They watch over their followers, passing down methods and mechanisms to keep them safe. Or in this case, they pass down more than is strictly needed to cause a DM some unwarranted headaches. Yeah, this subclass is, well, it's broken. Or at least that's what most of the people on the internet seem to suggest. The Twilight Cleric definitely has a reputation, and I want to give it a fair shake to see if that reputation is deserved or not. We will be looking at this from the context of the 2024 Player's Handbook, so maybe things have changed, or just gotten worse. Who knows? I have also included my own take at an example build of one of these thingies towards the end of the video if you're interested. Anyway, let's kick things off by taking a look at the subclass features on offer here. Fair warning, we will be spending a lot of time looking at what is offered at 3rd level. It is what it is. Being a cleric subclass, we obviously get access to a list of extra spells. Now, because this is older material and cleric subclasses have some wording issues in particular, this feature isn't explained within the written rules whatsoever. The feature points us to a specific feature in the 2014 Player's Handbook that just doesn't exist in the 2024 Player's Handbook. However, all revised cleric subclasses have extra spells and they work just how they used to. So if you really want to say this feature doesn't work at all, that's okay I guess, but I would suggest just letting it function as intended. Right, so we have all these spells prepared when we reach specific levels, and they don't count against our list of prepared spells either. And the list here is genuinely interesting for a divine spellcaster. Fairy Fire and Sleep are just solid options to have. The 2024 version of Sleep is also much improved and isn't limited by hit points. Moonbeam is an interesting alternative to the generally taken cleric damage dealing options like Spirit Weapon or Spirit Guardians. Aura of Vitality, Aura of Life, and Circle of Power all synergize really well with another feature we get, and we can keep the party up and fighting provided they stay within 30 feet of us. Greater Invisibility is nasty to say the least, and Mislead and See Invisibility have their own applications in specific situations. However, the standout for me here is Leomund's Tiny Hut, which is normally only available to wizards. It can be used for some very safe rests and has some interesting potential for planned out combat encounters. All in all, a list that any cleric would be excited to get their grubby paws on. Moving on, we get a plethora of other features at 3rd level too. We get proficiency with martial weapons and heavy armor for some reason. I honestly don't understand why this was included with this subclass, but it is here. I will just mention that you do absolutely still get this feature despite the Protector option for our Divine Order feature in the 2024 Player's Handbook giving the same things. Yes, you might not want to take that option and should probably always just take Thaumaturge when making a Twilight Cleric. Also, this isn't at all like Divine Strike, which we lose from the subclass features but gain from the general Cleric features or Potent Spellcasting if you choose. However, I will add that this feature specifically gives proficiency with heavy armor, and, well, we don't use that terminology anymore. We call it training for armors and shields now. So, technically speaking, I guess this feature doesn't really let you use heavy armor like it used to, unless you want to be a bit forgiving and call it the same thing. Personally, I don't feel the need to do so, because we still have 3 more features at this level, and wearing heavy armor isn't strictly needed here. Then we have Eyes of Night, which gives us a permanent 300 feet of dark vision, the highest in the game by a decent range. We can also use an action to share it with other creatures within 10 feet for an hour. The number of creatures you can affect equals your wisdom modifier, and you can use this feature once per long rest unless you spend a spell slot of any level to use it again. This is the beginning of the problems people have with this subclass. Yes, party-wide 300 feet of dark vision sounds really impressive, but it isn't quite as widely applicable as you might at first think. It all depends on the environment. However, it is of course the best dark vision tool in the game and is definitely powerful. Some DM advice: use line of sight and don't try to ambush your players in an open field in complete darkness. Vigilant Blessing is another small feature that lets us touch a creature as an action and give them advantage on their next initiative roll. The feature ends if the creature rolls initiative or if we use it again. However, of course, the bonus has no time limit whatsoever, just 'cause. This isn't terribly strong though, and is just kinda nice to have. Finally, we come to our fourth and final feature we get when we pick up this subclass, not including the extra spells of course. Channel Divinity Twilight Sanctuary is generally accepted as the strongest part of this subclass. As an action, we can spend a use of Channel Divinity to create a 30-foot radius sphere centered on ourselves. The sphere lasts for 1 minute and the area within the sphere is filled with dim light. It ends early if the user is incapacitated or dies. Take note, that's how to counter this one. Preferably through incapacitation, but death obviously works too. Now, whenever a creature, including you, ends their turn within the sphere, you can choose for that creature to gain 1d6 plus your cleric level in temporary hit points, or you can end an effect causing the creature to be charmed or frightened. You don't need to see, hear, smell, or even be remotely aware of the creature's presence either. They just have to be in the sphere. There is also no reaction involved either. So, is it as broken as everyone makes it out to be? Yeah, pretty much. The amount of temporary hit points is pretty friggin' high. You're handing out 6 or 7 at 3rd level, and it scales up to about 23 later on, and that's on every single one of your allies' turns. It doesn't require concentration, so you're still doing the regular cleric nonsense too. And yeah, no additional action economy is required either. Your allies are also functionally immune to charms and fears, but they still have to suck it up for their turn, which is somewhat of a saving grace here. And yes, if you don't want to target the cleric to fully remove the effect, you can try splitting the party, but good luck with that because 30 feet is big. Very big. Also, trying to starve out the cleric's channel divinity uses isn't the best plan to deal with this because they get them back on a short rest now. As for the dim light portion of the feature, it is completely separate from the other effects. However, it has its uses such as making you and your ally lightly obscured and therefore more difficult to spot with a perception check. I'm pretty sure the intention here is that the dim light of the sphere overcomes other sources of light because it states that the sphere is filled with dim light, and that's different to every other source that sheds dim light. But yeah, this one's open to some interpretation on how it interacts with other light sources. The rules for lighting interactions in D&D are somewhat abhorrent and would benefit from a hard-set priority system that isn't explained in the rules of different spells and effects. But maybe I'm wrong here, that's definitely a possibility too. At last we move on to 6th level. Here we get Steps of Night, the final feature that people have an issue with. As a bonus action, when in an area of dim light or darkness, you can give yourself a flying speed equal to your movement speed. In the 2024 PHB, we no longer call it movement speed and just refer to it as speed, but it's functionally the same thing. The flying speed here lasts for 1 minute, and you can use this feature a number of times equal to your proficiency bonus per long rest. If the dim light from Twilight Sanctuary is able to override any source of bright light, then this feature becomes very convenient to activate and use. If you're going by the interpretation that it doesn't, then it's a bit more of a challenge, but also not really. Finding a shady spot isn't too difficult after all. For some reason, DMs have a problem with flight in D&D. Yes, the Twilight Cleric can fly, but they unlock it 1 level later than wizards and sorcerers. There are also a bunch of species that can fly from level 1. 5e characters fly. I don't know what else to tell you here. If you have a problem with it, well, there isn't generally cover in the sky for combat purposes, and introducing an enemy with a ranged attack that knocks creatures prone is a very quick and brutal reminder that 10 feet equals 1d6 fall damage. In terms of exploration and problem solving, yeah, this is only temporary flight. Also, if flight is gonna solve the problem instantly, it wasn't much of a problem to begin with. But maybe I'm just jaded and tired of hearing complaints about flight in Dungeons & Dragons. Finally, our capstone feature at 17th level is Twilight Shroud. It's very simple and kind of bland. You and your allies get the benefits of half cover within the sphere created by your Twilight Sanctuary. This doesn't rely on the dim light, and half cover is obviously just a +2 bonus to AC and dexterity saves. If you are wearing heavy armor and using a shield at this level, we'd assume you at least have a set of full plate. So yeah, your AC would be 22 when Twilight Sanctuary is in effect. It's kinda strong, but immensely unexciting. I do feel that this is somewhat deserved though. This subclass gets a lot early on, and for them to get something crazy here would have been pushing it just a little bit. However, a 30-foot radius sphere is decently large when spreading the AC bonus on top of the temporary hit points, so keep that in mind. So, now that we've taken a gander at the subclass features, what exactly does the Twilight Domain Cleric do? Well, it can't be denied that it achieves the theme of rest, recuperation, and preparation. The spell list does some heavy lifting here, but the features themselves generally help with being prepared for the dangers that may lurk in the darkness. It is the best at handing out temporary hit points, bar none. It can pump out absurd levels of damage mitigation round after round if the DM just allows it to happen. Also, it can give out 300 feet of dark vision to a full party of adventurers for some reason. And yeah, almost everything in the current edition has dark vision, but not like this. Solidly one of the best support pieces in the game. The extra spell list allows for some interesting possibilities too. You want to make an Auramancer that creates a 30-foot emanation of pure victory? Go ahead. Obviously, this subclass turns its party into a force to be reckoned with in dark environments. The odd realization here, though, is that when you have mechanics like dark vision to deal with nighttime ambushes, you yourself subsequently unlock the potential to become the nighttime ambusher. However, there are the perceived downsides. This subclass gets more than any other character option at 3rd level. It gets 4 features and access to 4 extra spells when you pick it up, which is kind of insane. There is, of course, also the issue of Twilight Sanctuary. That feature is blatantly overpowered. The amount of temporary hit points and the frequency of them being dished out is just too much. The closest comparison is the World Tree Barbarian, who can only hand out temp HP at the beginning of their turn to a single person, and that's still pretty strong. The Twilight Cleric is exponentially better here. But I will say that apart from this single feature, I don't think anything else about this subclass is too strong. Is it ban-worthy though? I don't know, that's up to you. I personally don't like the idea of banning official player options. So, just a bit too strong overall? Yeah, kinda. Right, how do we build one? Well, I'd suggest starting by focusing on raising your wisdom as high as possible. You are a spellcaster and leaning into the cleric kit has great results. You will want a reasonable level of constitution though, mainly for concentration purposes, but your d8 hit die isn't anything special either. Pumping dex can be an option if you want to have better initiative rolls and wear medium or light armor. Obviously, if you're taking the heavy armor, then you need at least 13 strength for chainmail and 15 for plate, so keep that in mind. You are going to have to decide whether you want to build for cantrip or weapon damage to fall back on. At 7th level, you make this choice when you get the Blessed Strikes feature. As alluded to, this does replace the Divine Strike subclass feature we would have received at level 8. Personally, I prefer the potent spellcasting option here. While you can go mosh in the front lines with your heavy armor, I think that it's more effective to hang back and make sure your whole party is in range of your Twilight Sanctuary. So yeah, I highly suggest leaving the warrior light mentality to subclasses like the Forge or War Clerics. Maybe play more of a support role like the Life Domain. You have the grossest temporary hit point feature in the game and a spell list decked out with healing and support options. Use them. You are going to want to ask for a solid ruling on whether the dim light from Twilight Sanctuary overrides bright light though. If it does, then you can make a few interesting decisions to become a stealth buffer for your party, but that's a really niche area to build towards. For feats, I'd suggest something like Resilient or Warcaster to help with concentration checks. You will be forced to make one at some point, and failing those really sucks. Resilient is more effective here, but Warcaster lets you abuse opportunity attacks with magic on both enemies and allies. Shadow Touched is a bit of a flavor pick here. It gives invisibility which you won't have access to, maybe to tech more into the stealth buffer concept, or just for general shenanigans. Speedy is a decent option if you want to move faster to keep up with your party in combat and ensure Twilight Sanctuary always makes contact with as many allies as possible. Keen Mind and Observant are great choices if you want to be better at certain skills. Taking the study or search action as a bonus action is also pretty awesome in the right situation. Finally, the Chef feat is amazing for giving your party a small buffer of temporary hit points to hold them over until you get the real features going. It's also a fun bit of flavor because once the sun goes down, it's time for dinner. Adventuring is hungry business after all. As for our origin feat choices, taking Magic Initiate to get access to the shield spell is a great way to increase your durability. Tough can fulfill the same goal here too. However, if you're determined to swing your weapon around, picking up True Strike or Shillelagh is a way to use your wisdom for attack and damage rolls. Healer is a no-brainer if you're planning on keeping your party alive and well. Alert has some potential too, as you can just give yourself advantage on initiative rolls. You could also use it to swap places with an initiative-focused ally so that you can use Twilight Sanctuary earlier in the fight. As always, take whatever species suits your fancy. However, I will make two mentions here. Wood Elves get a lot that works really well with the Twilight Cleric. They move faster and get the Long Strider and pass without a trace spells. These can be combined with Twilight Sanctuary to maintain uptime or just make it a nightmare for anyone to detect your party at a crucial point in a stealth mission. They also get an extra skill proficiency and can finish a long rest in 4 hours. Then, the Goliath is the only species option that can grow larger without using their concentration. This gives Twilight Sanctuary a bigger area of effect so it can tag allies a lot easier. They also move pretty quickly and have the option to either be able to reduce damage taken on themselves, or just straight up teleport 30 feet as standouts, depending on your choice of ancestry, of course. Now, you can always choose to multiclass, but I wouldn't necessarily recommend it for the Twilight Cleric. I will say that due to the silly amount of features that you get at 3rd level, this makes an excellent choice for a 3-level dip. However, here are 3 options that work really well with the mechanics of this subclass. 5 levels of Warlock is a big investment for a multi-class, but there are 2 main reasons to do this. The one with the Shadow's Eldritch Invocation lets you cast invisibility on yourself while in dim light or darkness without expending a spell slot. Twilight Sanctuary just so happens to fill an area around you with dim light. It's pretty juicy. Then you can kind of cheese and extend the time armor of Agathis up with other sources of temporary hit points such as Twilight Sanctuary. The spell remains active as long as you have temporary hit points, but those temporary hit points don't necessarily need to come from the spell. And depending on how many levels of cleric you have, you can give yourself a fairly decent amount each turn. This means that every time you get hit in melee, the attacker will be smacked with a bunch of cold damage. Obviously, warlocks can be built to get extra attack if you want, and they have a lot of other useful tools too. The Shadow Monk is another interesting option that directly interacts with Twilight Sanctuary. At 3rd level, they increase the 300 foot of dark vision to 360 feet, provided you got the 300 feet first, and they can cast a darkness that they can see through. At 6th level, they can use a bonus action to teleport in an area of dim light or darkness, meaning you can bamf your bubble of twilight around and position yourself in whatever way is going to be best. Monks also get a bunch of other features that work very well on a cleric, like dashing as a bonus action, using wisdom and dex for armor class, and of course the punchy potential. It's also just a really thematic combination. Finally, I mentioned earlier that the other player option with a really strong temporary hit point feature is the World Tree Barbarian. Just to be clear, it is significantly worse than Twilight Sanctuary, but why not combine the two together? When you rage, sure, you can't cast or concentrate on spells, but you can still use other features like Twilight Sanctuary. So, at the start of your turn, you pick an ally and give them at least 2d6 temporary hit points. Then, at the end of an ally's turn, you give them some more. You can then just kind of be a barbarian and fly around bonking things. And after combat is done, you will have most of your spell slots left to use for healing the party and preparing for whatever lies ahead. It sounds pretty solid to me. Right, the time has come to build one of these pieces of somewhat overpowered goodness. The plan here is to go full support and try become a bit of a preemptive ambulance. So we're starting out as a wood elf for the extra speed, spells, and proficiency. We'll name our character Beledward, for reasons. We'll use the standard array to give Beledward a 15 in wisdom, a 14 in constitution, and a 13 in dexterity. As usual, do whatever you want with the other 3 abilities. I'm not choosing to focus on strength here because Beledward prefers medium armor and the difference in AC isn't high enough to worry about. Anyways, Beledward was a guide once upon a time, and as such they have a +2 to wisdom and a +1 to constitution, as well as the magic initiate origin feat. We have to choose from the druid spell list here, but that's perfect because we're picking up Starry Wisp as an attack roll cantrip to mix things up every now and then. We could also take Speak with Animals, Goodberry, or Entangle as our 1st level spell here. I don't know, I just kinda wanted the ability score combination here, and I like using pre-existing backgrounds where possible. You could also pick up Shillelagh, but I won't cause Beledward is frail on the inside. For skill proficiencies, we get access to stealth and survival from our background, which fits nicely with the extra spells from Wood Elf. I would suggest taking maybe insight and religion from the cleric list though. But that ties into my choice of the thaumaturge option for our divine order feature. Beledward will be great at religion checks because they fundamentally understand that their deity and the Twilight Domain is stronger than the rest. Also, we'll obviously pick up potent spellcasting later on instead of Divine Strike because running face first into the enemy sounds like a great way to get incapacitated or even killed. which means Twilight Sanctuary won't be active. Instead, we're going to make a fast Auramancer with spells like Spirit Guardians, Aura of Vitality, Aura of Life, and Circle of Power. Beledward will change the face of the battlefield with their presence alone, all while floating around like a Segway. When leveling up, the choices we make for feats will focus on our wisdom and constitution. At 4th level, we'll pick up Observant for expertise and perception. Beledward sees all with their deadpan and slightly constipated expressions. At 8th level, we'll take Resilient and boost our constitution to 16 to help out with concentration checks. At level 12, we'll cap out our wisdom at 20 with an ability score increase, and at level 16, we'll pick up Speedy so Beledward can become a shiny ambulance. Now, I'll be honest, I kind of forgot about this epic boon, but at 19th level, we'll take the boon of the Night Spirit. This allows us to use a bonus action to become invisible while in dim light or darkness, and this lasts until we take an action, bonus action, or reaction. Additionally, we get resistance to all damage except psychic and radiant while within dim light or darkness. Just a reminder, Twilight Sanctuary creates an area of dim light. This is amazing. So yeah, Beledward is a proper tanky temporary hit point ambulance with a lot of support and utility potential. The rest of the party can do the fighting though. Beledward's job is to just keep them all up and running, and to be fair, it's a job that they are exceptionally good at. And yes, it is kind of possible due to Twilight Sanctuary on its own. Alright, that was the Twilight Domain Cleric. I think Twilight Sanctuary is overpowered, and the rest is fine. That's my brave and somewhat bland take on things. What do you think, though? Anyway, if you've made it this far into the video, then you're a legend, and I really do appreciate you. How would you deal with this subclass from an encounter design perspective? And have you seen it or tried it in a game before? But yeah, that'll do it for this one. Cheers.